Hi, I'm Naomi Craig. I write historical fiction set in Bible times, and I'm so happy to be here with you today to share the first chapter of my novella, On Desolate Heights. This actually lays the groundwork for my first novel releasing with Celebrate Lit in late summer of next year. So I'm super excited. And here, without further ado, is On Desolate Heights. Chapter 1. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and had taken all his land from his hand as far as the Arnon. Numbers 21:26. Fall, BC 1401, near Pethor. Saroim retched violently, narrowly missing Balaam's gilded cloak. Balaam breathed deeply as the stench of vomit died to blissful power. Glancing at Saroim's writhing form, Balaam shook his head. Pity. If only Saroim had honored his promise of choice flocks to Hakaz, he wouldn't have to endure his intestines devouring him from the inside. Have mercy, Saroim gasped, clawing at his gut. Mercy isn't mine to give, my friend. Balaam cast the divination cup used to hold the cursed concoction against the rocks. The clay shattered. You shouldn't have crossed Hakaz. But what have I done to you? Saroim gurgled as he thrashed on his back. I'd call down curses on my own brother if the need arose. And it had. Balaam relished the memory, and a smile stretched across his face. His brother had answered for the times he'd ridiculed Balaam. His, a deliciously slow and agonizing death, unlike Saroim, who faded quickly. Balaam squatted, yanking the stopper from his wineskin with his teeth. He took in Saroim's cadaverous skin tone and the sweat beading on his forehead. His eyes rolled back in his head as Balaam dribbled strong wine in Saroim's mouth. He wasn't heartless. He scanned the courtyard. The fool hardly had time to enjoy his ill-gotten gain. Hakaz will surely take back what belonged to him, and then some. A female servant carrying a water jug skirted the courtyard, eyes darting to the prone figure of her master. Her face blanched and she turned away. Saroim drew shuddering breaths as more servants passed through, bent on performing their duties and avoiding Balaam. Ah, the intoxicating feeling of unbridled respect and raw power. Saroim's chest rattled as the life breath left him. Balaam nodded and spread the man's cloak over the carnage. He brushed off his hands and slung his satchel over his shoulder, his work here complete. Striding to the outer yard, he passed multiple servants, all making themselves small and avoiding eye contact. Fear, a side effect of the respect he preferred, only fed his satisfaction. Too many had misjudged his powers, a mistake they didn't make twice. It also meant servants refused to stick around to saddle his donkey when he completed his tasks. Blinking against the shadow in the structure housing Saroim's fancy horses, Balaam snapped the wool blanket, sending dust and donkey hair filtering through the mid-afternoon sunlight. The donkey shifted placidly, nudging him with her nose as if she, at least, was glad to see him. Balaam strapped the custom-made cushioned saddle to her back. If a man traveled across all the land, he might as well do it in comfort. A boy entered the structure, holding a sack overflowing with grain. Balaam straightened to his full, unpretentious height, secretly glad he had a few measures on the boy yet. He tightened the strap around the donkey's belly. In silence, the boy brushed Saroim's stallion, intelligent eyes ever on Balaam. This boy carried himself with an air of confidence. He tipped his head, studying Balaam, as if he knew his thoughts and understood his motives. It seemed this boy had the same ability as Balaam to discern people's intentions. Balaam led his donkey to the trough to drink. The boy wordlessly followed into the sunlight and began filling Balaam's water skin. He had a stocky form and a smooth chin. Shaggy hair mostly covered a slave's earring. Balaam crossed his arms. "What is your name, boy?" "Itay, my lord." Competent and respectful. Balaam nodded once. "Come with me." The boy swung around, eyes narrowed. "You were sold to Saroim's household when you were young, yes? Meaning you have no family holding you here. Hakaz will arrive soon to claim Saroim's wealth." Itay's gaze shifted beyond Balaam as he mounted the donkey. "You've heard of how Hakaz treats his servants and slaves, yes?" Draping the water skin across the donkey's withers, the boy glanced toward the courtyard. "And if I don't?" Throwing back his head, Balaam laughed. "I'm merely the messenger boy." An extremely wealthy messenger. Hakaz had paid well. "If you choose not to accompany me, you will never hear from me again, although you'd wish you could hire me when you discover Hakaz's whip." He applied the slightest pressure to the donkey's sides. She nodded her head with every step, giving the appearance of serving cheerfully. At times, he convinced himself the donkey understood him, and they had a connection knit stronger than master and beast. "Wait," Itay called out, as Balaam predicted. "May I pack my things?" Balaam dipped his chin. The boy broke into a run before he turned. Swift and intelligent. He would be good to have around. Itay returned in a flash, breathless. He cupped water from the trough to his mouth and shouldered his small pack. Glancing around, he shrugged and met Balaam's scrutiny with a nod. Balaam turned his donkey's head toward Pethor. They should have gotten to Pethor by sundown, but their journey lasted well into the night. Itay gave a tug on the donkey's lead to remind her not to linger. She nodded her head, and the torchlight made her expression appear reproachful. Indeed, her pace had steadily increased since the last unnecessary stop, where she had found a patch of thistles and refused to budge until she had devoured them all. Itay tightened his grip. Now that he couldn't see further than the ring of torchlight, he relied on the donkey to lead the way. "It won't be long now, boy," his new master's words slurred. Balaam had nursed his wineskin since the sun set with the familiarity of one who habitually drank precisely at the rise of every night. As proved true with most men, the wine loosened his tongue. Through inebriation, the man's real motivation came forth. Power and wealth. "Do you live alone, my lord?" "Aye, I do. A woman would only demand more of my wealth than I wish to share." Another glug of wine. "As it is, I'm free." Itay raised his eyebrows, glad that Mr. Balaam couldn't see his thoughts. No one could ever be free. If not a man, then something else acted as lord. Master Balaam's might well be his wine. The donkey lifted her chin and brayed into the night. An echoing chorus of donkeys called back. At the next bend, the light of 2 torches framing the archway to an estate beckoned. He let out a weary breath. Would serving a man who cast spells on others be better than serving in the abusive Hakaz's home? Itay shrugged. So far, he fared better than this morning. Knowing Master Saroim's arrogance, Hakaz might well kill off the whole household for vengeance. A snore interrupted Itay's pondering. He glanced over his shoulder and understood the need for the 3-sided basket contraption. Master Balaam's form slouched against the high backs. The sides were half the length, but the same height, safely keeping the master upright. The torchlight revealed his mouth hanging open, emitting the unholy sound. A deep voice projected from the shadows. "Welcome home, Master Balaam." Itay swung around. What would the master's servants say to finding him out cold, led home by a strange boy? The man approaching had huge shoulders and smelled of heated metal. Itay stepped into the light, swallowing hard. "Ah, Master Balaam, drunk again, are we?" The man glanced at Itay. "Don't worry, boy, we are accustomed to this. I am Medeb. I work the forge." Medeb hoisted Master Balaam over his shoulder. "Although not surprising, I'd hoped he would be conscious tonight. There are ambassadors from King Balak seeking to employ the master." Itay shifted and glanced toward the pavilion Medeb indicated, where a feast was underway. His stomach growled. Medeb jerked his head away from the guests. "Put out the lamp. Follow me. It wouldn't do for the king's ambassadors to see the master in this state." They skirted the shadows, Itay blindly following Medeb's bulky form. He stumbled and the gravel shifted beneath his feet. Gripping the donkey's lead, he righted himself. Panic clawed at his throat. He couldn't see Medeb for the dark. Planting his feet, he groped the empty air in front of him. "Medeb?" The donkey stepped on, sure of her proximity to her stall. Itay put his hand on her shoulder and his confidence grew. She knew this land. Within minutes, he sensed a building before him. He reached out, his hand bumping into wooden slats. Master Balaam must do well for himself to import wood for a stall. The donkey entered the doorway, scraping Itay off her side. "Ouch!" Itay rubbed his arm. "Fool donkey?" Not that he blamed her. Apart from her snack, they'd all missed the evening meal. He heard the grinding of the donkey munching, and as he shuffled in, one hand in front of him, one hand on the wall. Could he safely light a lamp? He wouldn't reveal Master Balaam in poor form any longer. He found his way to the donkey. Satisfaction puffed his chest when his memory led him directly to the flint and lighting stone, right where he had put it after lighting the torch at sundown. Light illuminated the stall. Another spark revealed an oil lamp. Itay struck the flint once more and lit the wick, the smell of burning oil curling up with the smoke from the flame. The donkey lived well. Grain filled a stone manger and clean water invited Itay from a trough. Sweet-smelling grasses for the donkey to bed down on lay in the corner beside a bench to hold her saddle and blanket. Itay unstrapped the saddle and hoisted it to the bench. The donkey paused in her munching, long enough to study Itay with gentle eyes. Should he search out Medeb? His stomach clenched and he stared at the donkey's grain. If a donkey lived so well, surely Master Balaam wouldn't begrudge a slave partaking, right? Itay knelt at the trough to cup water to his mouth and then grabbed a handful of grain. Spreading the donkey's blanket in the corner of the stall before she had a chance to choose her spot, Itay extinguished the lamp and munched his grain. The next morning, Itay emerged from the donkey's stall, stretching out the kinks in his neck. "You there!" Itay jerked his head around. 3 men in robes that bespoke wealth advanced toward him. He shifted, squinting against the rising sun. "Yes, my lords? Where's your master? The banquet hosts told us he arrived last night." Lowering his chin, Itay plucked dried grass from his knee-length tunic. "Yes, my lord." "We have waited long enough." Impatience and irritation laced the man's voice as if Itay had control over the situation. "You tell him King Balak wants him to out King Sihon of the Amorites." Itay's head jerked up despite protocol to keep his posture humble. His eyes widened. The man continued speaking as if telling of assassination plans to a boy was commonplace. "Sihon stole land rightfully belonging to King Balak. Well, King Zippor." "So King Zippor was the one wronged? What message should he give?" Itay frowned and opened his mouth as the man thrust a satchel into his arms. He stumbled back at the weight of it. He clamped his mouth shut not to gape. Metal clinked against metal. Itay tightened his fingers against the tanned hide and stared at the men's departing backs. The one in the middle turned his head. "Be sure he receives the message." They mounted their waiting camels and headed down the path Itay had followed the night before. Itay glanced around him. Nobody stirred in the estate. A large stone house with cedar pillars took a place of prominence, surrounded by smaller, less obtrusive structures. A huge cooking oven sat under the awning nearest him, to keep heat out of the main house, no doubt. Behind lay a covered well and a substantial garden. Beyond the stall he shared with the donkey, a moderate stone building arose. Probably the servants' quarters. Sorry, that was my dog. Probably the servants' quarters. Fields of grain, waving gold in the sun, spread to either side, and Itay could see donkeys grazing on the slope of the mountain. He peered inside the bag in his arms. Silver. Enough to make a fresh start. He hadn't met anyone, except Medeb, and he hadn't asked if Itay belonged. What were the chances Master Balaam would remember him after passing out drunk? The image of Saroim's horrendous death flashed in his thoughts. If the master did remember and realized Itay had stolen the money, he would surely suffer a similar fate. His stomach roiled. And that is the end of chapter 1 of On Desolate Heights. This is available exclusively for my newsletter subscribers. It is free to download. You can find out more information about that and about me at naomicraig.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope you have a blessed day.